James Boyes. James is an author and political analyst and professor at Richmond, the American International University in London, joining this hour in our London bureau. Good to have you with us, James.
Good morning, George.
James, what's your read on this? Because, look, there's definitely been a give and take here. As Michelle just pointed out, the United States wanted everyone traveling through Mexico to claim asylum there first before being able to claim asylum in the U.S. That's not what they got here. Instead, the U.S. has agreed to expand its program to return migrants to Mexico while their asylum claims are being processed. So, again, the U.S. didn't get exactly what it wanted, but both sides did move here.
Indeed, and quite frankly, that's what you would expect in any international negotiation, isn't it, quite frankly, that both sides would come to a negotiation table with their own aspirations and come away with a little bit of what both sides want, without one side dominating completely. So I think that both Mexico and the United States have got much to be happy with here. It's not an ideal solution, quite frankly, and this isn't going to end the migratory flows coming both into Mexico and then further on into the United States. But clearly, I think this gives both sides something to cling on to claim some degree of victory, including the president.
I want to push forward on your point there. Mexico certainly under pressure to show results. That nation will put forward an enforcement surge, is what they're calling it, putting more National Guard troops on the southern border. Both sides agree that if there's no difference given this agreement, the two will continue their talks over the next 90 days and further action may be necessary. So is this more of a bandage on a much bigger problem?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, this hasn't solved the problem of migratory flows through Central America and the impact that that has as many of them make their way into the United States without paperwork. But very, very clearly, this is something which in the short term is enabling both sides to claim some degree of success. One of the great challenges, of course, though, is that the threat to impose these tariffs and to impose harsher restrictions upon travel through Mexico into the United States has arguably caused a spike in those numbers. The arrests in May were at a 12-year high, quite frankly, and you have to ask whether that was in part because of an attempt to get in before these harsher penalties were introduced. There were also reports that businesses were desperately trying to get their goods and services across the Mexican border at the back end of last week out of fear of these tariffs. So Donald Trump's efforts to talk about a tariff war and imposing this increasing imposition of penalties upon Mexico has clearly had an effect, and it clearly is something I think that he's keeping in his back pocket that he can pull out again if indeed these negotiations don't go anywhere.
All right, but get a little more on that point, the pressure from Republicans, the pressure from business leaders. Do you think that made a difference here with this president over tariffs? The president may be agreeing to settle here on this agreement now rather than implementing tariffs and then hoping for a better deal.
Well, I think the difficulty was that as soon as tariffs had actually been introduced, they could only really have been withdrawn once you could start seeing some tangible benefit from that. And that was always going to be quite difficult, especially because the main people who were going to be hit in the short to medium term were likely to be the American public, as they saw an increase in the cost of everything that was imported from Mexico. There's no doubt that business leaders, Republicans, Democrats, all seem to be opposed to this idea of the imposition of tariffs. And when you consider just how close we are now getting to the 2020 election campaign, the very last thing that Donald Trump wants, quite frankly, is the cost of everything in the United States going up, and that having an adverse effect upon the economy, which of course is going to be his strong card, I think, moving into his re-election campaign.
And Democrats watching that very closely. They are reacting, of course, to this deal. Here's what the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say about it. You can sense the sarcasm here. This is a historic night, he says. Real Donald Trump has announced that he has cut a deal to greatly reduce or eliminate illegal immigration coming from Mexico and into the United States. Now that the problem is solved, I'm sure we won't be hearing any more about it in the future. So that from Democrats there. Look, does this allow the president to say that he accomplished his goal on immigration? Should the flow of migrants dramatically drop? And if so, what does that mean for him in 2020?
Now, what makes you think that Chuck Schumer is not being sincere there, George? I think there's no doubt about it that Donald Trump does have a track record, frankly, of announcing deals and making it sound like the problem has gone away. He did something similar, if you remember, with regard to ISIS in the Middle East, which caused many people to sort of shake their heads and think, well, hang about a second, I'm sure there's still a problem there. If, however, there is a reduction in migration flows into the United States, then that's certainly something Donald Trump can point to. But let's not forget that stemming migration flows into the United States from Mexico is something which actually Democrats and Republicans agree upon. And there's lots of footage, for example, of Senator Schumer saying very, very similar things in past years to Donald Trump. I think where they disagree is perhaps the methods, but this should, quite frankly, be a bipartisan issue. It probably would be in the best interests of both Democratic and Republican leaders to come together to find some way of addressing this problem once and for all.
Somehow, though, I just have to say, James, you could sense the sarcasm coming from that tweet. That one in particular. James Boyes, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.